Hey, Modern Math teacher. Welcome back to another episode of the Modern Math Teacher Podcast. I'm your host, Kristen Moore, and today we're talking into a topic that's at the heart of the effective math instruction, and that is the 8 mathematical practices. Okay, so these practices are key to helping our students develop that critical thinking and problem solving skills that they're going to need to succeed, not just in math, but in life. These are the true skills that our students are going to be using beyond our classroom walls. So, it's important that we take time to be intentional and develop them. And that is what today is about. In today's episode, we'll be talking about practical ways to incorporate these practices into your daily lessons. We'll explore how to weave them into your instruction so that they become really more of a natural part of your classroom routine. If you're up for it, let's get started. Now, before we jump into how to do these things, let's do a quick recap of what the 8 mathematical practices are. Remember, these are those practices from the Common Core State Standards of Mathematics, and they describe the behaviors and thought processes that students should develop as they engage with math content. They are number 1, make sense of problems and persevere in solving them. Number 2, reason abstractly and quantitatively. Number 3, construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others. Number 4, model with the mathematics. Number 5, use appropriate tools strategically. 6, attend to precision. 7, look for and make use of structure. And 8, look for and express regularity in repeated reasoning. Whew. You guys, these 8 practices are not just extra activities. These are things that should be integral to how we teach math every day. So, how do we make that happen? I'm here to break it down for you one practice at a time. Let's get started with math practice number 1. Make sense of problems and persevere in solving them. This is probably my favorite one. And it's all about encouraging our students to understand the problem before jumping into solving it and then sticking with it even when it gets tough. So, one way you can embed this into your daily lessons is by incorporating those open ended problems that don't necessarily have a single right answer. A lot of us are doing that with the exploration tasks or thinking tasks that we're using in our building thinking classroom model lessons. Okay. So these problems require our students to think deeply about the situation and explore different strategies for finding a solution. To help our students persevere, you could consider using a think, pair, share strategy where they're first going to try to solve the problem on their own, then they're going to partner up, chat about it with their neighbor, and then share their ideas with the whole class. This works really well if you're not up at the whiteboards doing a thinking task, but if you're sitting at your desk and doing a task together there. This strategy will not only encourage perseverance, but it also builds that classroom culture where it's okay to struggle and make mistakes, because that, my friends, is where the real learning happens. Okay, so that's it for number 1. Let's talk about math practice number 2, and that is reason abstractly and quantitatively. This one can be weird for teachers and they're not sure what to do with it, but this practice is about helping our students go back and forth between the concrete and the abstract. Okay. So, for example, when you're working with equations, students should be able to interpret, of course, all of the symbols and what they represent in the real world problem. Okay. So, if I'm thinking about this, one way you could incorporate this into your lessons would be to start with a concrete scenario, something like comparing different phone plans or streaming service plans, something that your students can connect to. Remember, connection is key. Once you've done that, we want to guide our students to then write and solve equations that represent that situation. You've got a concrete idea and you're learning how to abstractly write that in algebraic terms. That concrete idea and situation and connecting those concepts from the concrete to the abstract is going to help your students better understand conceptually what's happening within an equation. And we're always all about building good conceptual understanding. Okay, that brings us to practice number 3. We want our students to be able to construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others. That is all about mathematical discourse, getting our students to explain their thinking and engaging with others and their ideas. And we talked about this already in episode 65 on boosting student engagement through discourse. So I'll make sure I link that in the show notes for you in case you didn't catch that episode. But For now, I want you to think about how you can create opportunities for students to discuss their strategies and solutions. This could be through, a structured debate, through a warm up in a think, pair, share, anything where your students can present different approaches to solving a problem, or through routine math talks where your students are sharing about their thinking on a particular question. No matter what, we want our students talking in the classroom. Now, let's talk about practice number 4. We're almost halfway there, you guys. This practice is all about applying math to real world situations. Practice 4 is modeling with mathematics. Now, one simple way that you can incorporate this is by using word problems that are based on real life scenarios. You know, I am all about keeping it real, relevant, and rigorous in the math class, and that is where this is coming into play. For example, if you are teaching about linear equations, you can use a problem that involves calculating the cost of ordering food, like a pizza at a restaurant, or if you live in a city, calculating the cost of a taxi ride or an Uber based on the distance that you're traveling. In this practice, we want to make sure that we are encouraging our students to create their own models, whatever that looks like. So, whether it's drawing a diagram, writing an equation, or even using a physical model to represent the situation. The whole point here is that our students have the autonomy to model in a way that makes sense to them. And that brings me to practice number 5, where we want our students to use appropriate tools strategically. Okay. Again, they're going to get autonomy here. It's about helping our students choose and use the right tools for the task at hand and giving them the autonomy and understanding to know how to pick those. So, whether that is a calculator, a protractor, some sort of online graphing tool or simulator like Desmos, students should be able to decide which tool is going to best help them model and solve that problem. So, a great way to integrate that into your daily lessons is to provide your students with multiple tools to choose from and then let them explain why they're picking one tool over another. For example, anytime you're working on graphing, okay, this is a great place to incorporate this standard. Give your students an option of using a graphing calculator, some graph paper, or an online tool like Desmos and ask them why they picked that one. What is it about that tool that they enjoy using and why maybe they aren't choosing the others? This not only helps your students become more strategic, but it also helps reinforce their understanding of the concepts that they are working with. And we are always all about building that understanding. Now, we're at practice 6. Practice 6 is attending to precision, okay? So our students can't just be math-ishing the numbers. We've got to talk about accuracy here. This is, whether it's in your calculations, your measurements, or the language that we're using to describe our mathematical ideas. So, you as the teacher in your lessons can encourage precision by modeling it yourself. For example, when you are solving a problem, if you're solving a problem up at the board or in video notes, whatever it is you're doing, I want you to talk through that math thought process, okay? Being careful to use really precise language describing what you're doing. You can also make precision a classroom expectation by having students double check their work, right? Checking their solutions or explaining their reasoning in complete sentences. So, they can do it procedurally through double checking their work. They can do it, verbally through explaining their reasoning in writing across the curriculum there. And over time, as you incorporate these practices, you modeling it, you asking for different ways for students to make sure that they are precise, your students will learn that math requires careful attention to detail. Okay, that brings us to our last 2 practices. Practice number 7 is look for and make use of structure. This is where we're going to encourage our students to see patterns and use them to solve more efficiently. Okay, one way you can build this into your lessons is by pointing out the structure of math problems, right? Look at how the distributive property works or how to recognize a pattern in a sequence and help use those patterns to predict the next term. You might also have students create their own problems by applying a known structure, like turning an arithmetic sequence into a real world situation. These ideas are going to encourage your students to see the underlying math, not just the surface level of the problem. And finally, that brings us to practice number 8. This time, we want our students to look for and express regularity in repeated reasoning. This, you guys, is all about helping students identify whether they're doing the same thing over and over again and use that repetition to make their own generalizations or shortcuts. So, one simple way you could incorporate that is through reflection. Okay. After your students have completed a set of problems that you know they're using repetitive and regular reasoning for, ask them to think about whether they noticed any patterns or strategies that they used repeatedly. Again, this could be through a think, pair, share, or it could be through a written reflection. For instance, if your students are working on solving quadratic equations, you might have them reflect on how they used factoring in different problems and whether there was a shortcut that they could apply to future problems. All right. Whew. Now, that brings us to the end of all 8 math practices. I know that is a lot to take in, but bite sized PD is the name of the game here. The key to making sure that the 8 math practices are part of your daily instruction is to start small. So, I want you to focus in on just 1 or 2 of these practices at a time. Think about how you can naturally weave them in to your daily lessons, your coursework, and what you and your students are already doing. Over time, you're going to find that it's easier to incorporate these practices and it becomes second nature for both you and your students. And the benefits will be clear: deeper understanding, better problem solving skills, and more confidence in math. And don't we know our students need those opportunities to build in that confidence? Now, to help you get started and keep the focus of these 8 math practices alive in the classroom, I've created a resource that outlines each of those 8 math practices in teacher talk and in student friendly language that you can print out and display in your classroom to keep students engaged and actively thinking about their reasoning and strategies that you are using in the classroom. I'll make sure to link that here. It's in my TPT store for just $3. So, uh, get that, keep the practices alive. All right, you guys, that is it for today's episode. I hope you really feel inspired to incorporate the 8 math practices into your teaching and that you have a better understanding of what they are. There are 8 powerful practices that you can use to transform the teaching and learning inside your classroom. Remember, these practices are there to and designed to help you and help students think like mathematicians and develop the skills they need to be successful in and out of the classroom. So, if you're loving these episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Modern Math Teacher podcast. Don't forget to leave a review. Your feedback helps other teachers find the show and keep the conversation going. Next time, we'll be diving into growth mindset strategies inspired by none other than Dr. Jo Boaler and her work. So you definitely don't want to miss that. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'll catch you in the next episode. Keep integrating those practices. And as always, keep it real.